jury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Have a seat. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm Dan Patterson.
And Mr. Patterson, as I understand it, you have some hearing issues, is that correct?
Yes, I've got my hearing aids turned up all the way, so I should be okay.
Okay. If you have any trouble understanding me, please just let me know.
Thanks.
Thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm currently retired from everything. I worked for the sheriff's office from 1991 to 2015. I did some security work for Allied Universal from 2015 till last month. A couple months ago, I retired completely.
Thank you. You said you worked Hold on just a second. Okay. You said you worked at the sheriff's office from 1991 till 2015?
Yes.
And when you were in the later stages of your career, what was your role within the sheriff's department?
I was an investigator for 14 years, sergeant.
During that time, did you have any involvement in the disappearance of Dylan Redwine?
Yes.
What was your role in the case?
It was initially assigned to me, missing child case.
And how did you first become involved in the case?
I was directed to see where the kid might be by my supervisor.
And you described it that it was a missing persons case, correct?
Yes.
What are the steps that law enforcement typically would take in the beginning of a missing person case?
I typically would check the residence. I've found children hiding inside the house before. I'd check neighbors. I would check friends, see if they might be with some friends, and maybe they can give a clue as to where he might have gone. Check to try to see what the dynamic was between the parents and the children to see if they might have wanted to leave. Also, what their interests were, if they may have gone for a hike or gone fishing or whatever the case might be, and just kind of get a direction of where we might be able to find them. But let's start at the home, work my way out from there.
And did you, in fact, do that in this case?
Yes.
Did you, early on in a missing persons case, is there sometimes an effort to use their electronic devices or their phone to locate them?
Yes.
Can you describe how that works?
We can request information from the phone company, and actually we usually need to get a warrant for that, but they can ping the phone, triangulate from towers, and often pinpoint where the phone might be, which is one way. I mean, the obvious way would be to call the phone first. Sometimes they answer, and but we weren't able to get any signal from that phone from the day I was involved. Never did find it.
Never did find it, never did get a signal, is that what you said?
Yes.
Thank you. Early on in the case, did you meet with the family?
Not right at first. It's just when we couldn't find them right away, I did meet with the family. Mother and brother came out, and by that point, it turned into a more extensive search, and search and rescue personnel were involved, and we initially combed the area trying to find him, and went from there.
Early on in the case, especially those first 24 to 48 hours, did you ever instruct Mark Redwine that he should stay at his home in case Dylan Redwine were to call? Was he ordered to stay at home?
No. He did say he'd like to stay home in case someone would call with information, and he wanted to be around so that he wouldn't miss a phone call. It might even be Dylan. So I believe that's what he did.
Okay. Do you recall receiving Dylan Redwine's laptop into evidence in the case?
Yes.
And do you recall where that came from?
It's from Mark Redwine's residence. It was on the kind of the kitchen dining area.
Okay. You wrote a report about this case, correct?
Yes.
And if I were to show you, well, one moment, please. Let me ask it like this. Do you recall receiving any devices from Elaine Hall and Corey Redwine, Mark's other family from Colorado Springs?
I remember looking at Elaine's cell phone. She had texts on it from Dylan.
Okay. But it's your recollection that the laptop belonging to Dylan actually came from Mark's residence. Is that correct? Mark Redwine's residence?
Yes.
Okay. Was one of the parts of your investigation to conduct some neighborhood canvassing?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Initially, it was neighbors right around there, and it turned into a more extensive canvassing. It was just a grid search, and she's a crime analyst at the time. We did a grid pattern search of every single resident up there. Not everybody was home, but we did try to talk to everyone in the Vyacito area.
Would it be fair to describe this canvassing effort as ongoing and coming out at different times during the case?
Yeah. We'd hear about someone that may come back from vacation, and we'd try to contact them, and we'd follow up on tips that we received. We were receiving a lot of tips, follow up on those, and anytime someone had an idea about where he might be, we'd try to follow through and see to its end.
And I want to get back to the tips in just a second, but I still want to stay on these early days of the investigation. Did search and rescue play an active role during that time?
Yes, they did. Right at the beginning, it might even been the next day after I was called out, they organized a team, and we were searching the hills in and around the residence, and also the community out there. Yeah, at one point they thought they might have spotted some person about the size of Dylan running on the hill up behind the house. I responded to that one with investigator Tom Cowling. Tracked her down. It was just a jogger that was out for a jog, but they never had any results on where he might be. Their efforts.
So someone saw a jogger, thought it might be Dylan, and you ran that down?
Yeah.
Okay. Did search and rescue, while they were there, did they conduct their own neighborhood canvassing as well?
Yes. And after about the second day, they decided it's probably just a runaway, and they went home.
Okay. Did the FBI become involved around that time?
I'm not sure. I can't remember when they got involved, but they did get involved on that. That would be my supervisor would have called them and enlisted their help.
Do you recall whether they also engaged in the neighborhood canvassing effort?
They were, and they also, you know, volunteered to follow up on tips and leads that might be helpful. So they from early on, they were assisting.
And then you also described that one of your coworkers, a crime analyst, I think you called her, Carrie Bonine,
Yes,
and you engaged in a more thorough canvassing effort later as well.
yes,
And you described that as a grid pattern?
yes.
What does that mean?
That means every residence on every road, back and forth. Obviously, you have to follow roads around, but we do a sweep. This one was from north end of the lake to the south end of the lake, and we followed every road to its end and knocked on every door.
And did this neighborhood canvassing effort, whether by search and rescue or the FBI or your own work, did that ever produce any evidence that helped you find Dylan Redwine?
No.
You talked a little bit about tips, and tell us how did the tips get received into law enforcement?
Initially, it was my phone they were calling, and my fellow investigators. We would leave cards, but it got to a point where we had to organize that a little better. There was too many calls coming in, and we set up a tip line, and we kept the log, and from that log, then we would decide who would go where and who would follow up on which tip. And it was a dedicated line just for tips, and we would go through the logs every day and try to follow up on all of them.
Was there a strong community-based effort to try to find Dylan Redwine?
Yes, and a lot of those tips were the community trying to help, and a lot of volunteers in the community would offer to assist the searches. And so it seemed like they were pulling together. Everybody wanted to locate them, and it's kind of a small, tight community up there. And so we received a lot of cooperation from everybody.
When you say up there, do you mean the Vyacito area?
Vyacito area.
And roughly, and I understand it's been a long time, roughly how many houses are up there? How many full-time residents?
There's maybe 150 or so. It's hard to say. I never counted.
Okay, fair enough. So you said you followed up on these tips. Why?
Well, it doesn't, any tip could be legitimate. Someone may have given us a tip that they had a psychic feeling that he might be in the lake. And I don't know if that's a legitimate, thing or not. But this person might have actual information that he's in the lake and just wanted to play it off as a psychic reading. So you can't disregard anything. Wherever they tell you he might be at this location, they think he's at this location, we'd go and we'd look. And so many of the tips to us, just on the face, it didn't seem like they were really relevant or might even lead to anything, but you can't disregard it because I don't know what the mindset is. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know where they got the tip. I don't know the reason they're given the tip. So we just follow up on all of them, and that way we can cover our bases and not miss them.
Were there a lot of psychic tips that came in?
There were a lot of psychic tips that came in.
There was a tip that came in from Moriarty, New Mexico. Do you recall that?
Yes.
What do you remember about that, and what steps you took to follow up on it?
Someone recognized or said they saw Dylan in Moriarty, and so we requested the video surveillance of the store they saw him in. The video was sent, and there was a boy, his size, his hair color, his age, wearing the type of clothes that he wears. Had a hat and everything on, but you can't really, a surveillance video, you can't be sure.
What did you do with that video after you received it?
I showed it to Elaine and her family, and to her it looked like it could be him. She seemed so convinced. I was, pretty hopeful that it was. So I requested that I go down and look, and I was given permission to do so, and I left right away, and I went and tracked down this boy.
When did you go? How soon after receiving the video and the positive identification from Elaine Hall did you drive down there?
As soon as we showed her, and I think it might have been the same day. I left that afternoon.
Okay.
And it may have been the same day.
And did you, in fact, go down to Moriarty?
I did.
What did you find when you arrived?
I located the store. I don't remember what kind of store it was, a dollar store or something like that. And talked to the manager and talked to people around there and showed them still photographs of the surveillance video. And it didn't take long for them to recognize that boy. And they told me, from more than one person, they told me where he lives. And so I went there, and it was the boy, wearing the same exact clothes as he did in the video. I took still photos of him on my phone and sent them back to the office so that they could show Elaine, and basically it wasn't him. It was just a random child that looked like him and wore the same clothes and walked like him, and just a coincidence.
And when you say it wasn't him, meaning it was not Dylan Redwine?
Dylan Redwine.
Okay. I want to shift topics a little bit. Was one of the things that you did during your investigation to acquire Mark Redwine's bank records?
Yes.
And did you get those directly from the bank itself?
I did.
And do you recall the owners on that bank account, meaning like what names were on the bank account?
Mark
Hearsay Foundation.
Mr. Champagne?
I'm asking him if he recalls it.
Okay, well, I'll let him answer that question, but the next one is probably hearsay, isn't it? And
That's fine, Judge. Do you recall the owners on that bank account without saying their names?
Yes.
Okay. And did you put those bank records into evidence?
Yes.
Okay. And we're going to have another witness talk about those later, Your Honor. So no further questions on that topic. Did you engage in searches in the fall and winter of the fall of 2012 through the winter and into 2013?
Yes.
Do you recall which areas were focused on first by law enforcement?
Middle Mountain was an area we're looking at.
And Vyacito Lake, did you focus on Vyacito Lake?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you recall other searches around that area? And if you do, could you describe those for the jury?
I was personally up in a helicopter several times, doing flyovers, and enlisted the help of boats with sonars on the lake, and revisited homes that we'd already, checked that were vacant. And so, yeah, that kind of stuff. I went with any search teams that were organized to go up on Middle Mountain, including the one when we discovered his bones.
Okay. Let's go back to the fall and early winter of 2012. Do you recall a roadway search throughout the region?
Yeah, search and rescue, would, as well as other volunteers, fire department and other volunteers would be walking along the roadways. We did that along Lemon Lake and, did that more than once on the Middle Mountain Road, and just looking for anything that may have been discarded that might belong to Dylan, like the phone or any of his property or the backpack that we never found. So it was that kind of roadway search that we did.
And were these search efforts ongoing throughout the winter?
Yes, and I personally would keep searching even if it wasn't with an organized group. I would go up and look at places that I might have been able to find discarded stuff. And it's just part of the whole thing, just trying to cover all the bases. And I don't necessarily, I don't mean to say anything bad about people, but I don't trust other people's search and how well they do it. So a lot of times I would just recanvass on my own, hoping that I could see something that was missed the first time.
So you checked and double checked, and checked again. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Did you ever find any evidence relating to Dylan Redwine?
And not until the day we found his shoe.
And we're going to go there in just a second. I want to ask you about the searching on Middle Mountain and how the snow over the winter may have impacted that.
It did, and I would go up occasionally to see how much of the snow had melted, so that we can try to pick a date for a group effort. I mean, the volunteers were over 70. And I wanted the road to be clear so that we could go up as far as we could and just start working our way back down the mountain. So I would check to see where the level was. I went up on one occasion, the gate was still closed. And that's what I was waiting for that gate to open up so that we can get a cruise up there and start searching.
You said you went up there and the gate was still closed. Do you remember roughly when that was?
I don't remember.
And that's fine. If I approached with one of the supplemental reports that you wrote, do you think it would refresh your recollection?
Yes.
Page 461, Counsel.
What's the number of the supplemental?
369.
Thank you.
Let me approach that. You may. Take a look at the top 3 paragraphs here. Read those to yourself and let me know when you finish.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to approach to retrieve that. You may. You said you went up and checked Middle Mountain Road to see if the gate was still open. Do you remember, after looking at this now, when that was and why you did that?
April 23rd is where I believe it was on there, 2013. I went up to check the gate. Also, received a tip that someone saw Mark's truck driving up on that day. And I wanted to see if the gate was open, and I wanted to see if I could discern his tire tracks, where he may have gone or what he was doing up there. The gate was closed, and there was a lot of tire tracks around, including ATV tracks that covered up the vehicle track, regular vehicle tracks. So couldn't really gather any information from that. But the gate was still locked. I walked around it and went up the road a little ways, and I saw that the snow was maybe a couple 100 yards up. And it was melted off the road. After that, it was still pretty snowed in.
Okay. So you were actually able to walk around the gate and?
Yeah.
If I showed you a map of that particular search on April 23rd, 2013, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Exhibit number 499, for the record, if I may approach.
Yes.
You recognize that, sir?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate description of the search you conducted on April 23rd, 2013?
Yes.
Move to admit. Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
Submitted. Move to publish.
Yes.
And sir, I had the map up on the screen behind you there. There's a blue line on that map. What does that represent?
That looks like the road on Middle Mountain going up there.
As you drove that road, did
Yeah.
you obviously you went to see if the gate was open, that's what you said.
Yes.
Were you also visually scanning the roadway area?
I always do.
Okay. Did you see anything of evidence in this case?
No.
Do you recall directing a search of the pond area next to Vyacito Dam Power Plant?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
There's a pond directly below the dam that, just adjacent to the spillway, that general public doesn't have access to, but you can get in there. They engineered the gates so that you can walk around, or the fences, so that the wildlife can't, but people can, except for small animals. But there's a pond that has nothing can escape from that pond, and I wanted to see if I could find anything in there, and I went up there and dragged the pond with a grappling hook, and then I made arrangements for a dive team to go into that pond and see what they could see, just in case there was something there of use, but we didn't find anything.
You didn't find anything in the pond?
Other than big trout, and that was about it.
Okay. Nothing related to this case, though?
No.
Did you continue to search the Middle Mountain area in the spring of 2013?
Yes.
You recall conducting a search on Middle Mountain Road on May 22nd, 2013?
Yes.
Can you describe that for us?
That search, I believe, was also with search and rescue personnel. And everybody had an assignment, and everybody was searching. And
You recall driving up high and then walking back down during this search?
yes, I drove up to where, as far as snow was melt, and it was pretty high. I'd walk down the side of the road on my own, pretty much, looking on both sides for the day I spent up there.
If I showed you a map of that search, would you recognize it?
Yeah.
People's 501, I may approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate description of the search you conducted on that I believe it was May 22nd, 2013.
Yes.
Move to admit.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
Admitted.
Did you find anything relevant to this case during that search?
No.
Do you recall conducting a search of the Waterfall area the next day?
Yes.
What is the Waterfall area?
Right next to the road, not far below the gate.
What I'd like to do is publish number 501, show that to the jury. And there, again, we have the blue line on the map, and the blue line ends near the, sort of near the top of Middle Mountain Road there. Is that a fair and accurate description of the area that you searched with your
Yes.
walk for that day?
Yes.
And we were discussing the Waterfall area. Can you just give us a verbal description of what the Waterfall area looked like?
It was just a section of the road that had no trees on it, and it was below the gravel pit, and it just looked like a straight drop off, but there was a culvert under the road, and from that culvert was the waterfall, and it dropped down into quite a ways, but you could see the bottom if you peered over the side from the road. And there was a lot of stuff down there that people had been dumping. So I went down there and was looking around.
What did you find down there at the bottom of the Waterfall area?
Microwaves and bags full of animal parts like bear paws and trash and stuff like that.
Okay. Did you find any evidence relating to this case?
No.
If I showed you a map of that area, would you recognize it?
Yes.
502?
Yes.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
And is it a fair and accurate description of the waterfall search you conducted on May 23rd, 2013?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
Move to publish.
Yes, it's admitted. You may publish.
Thank you. I've got the waterfall area there on the large screen. Could you describe for the jurors what you saw there and what it looked like? That's a poor question. Strike that. Was it a large area that you were searching?
It was an area probably at least as big as this square footage of this building, and steep embankments on both sides. The water continued down, but that area I concentrated on because that's where I found a pile of trash. Everybody is treating it like a landfill.
Okay. And again, you never found anything of interest in that area, did you?
No.
I'd like to turn your attention now to June of 2013. Did you help plan and later participate in a large-scale search of Middle Mountain at that time?
Yes.
And tell us about that. How did that come to pass?
Arrangements had been made months prior to do that, and we formulate some kind of plan, and search and rescue organized, had volunteers from the fire department and law enforcement, other agencies, and they organized people in groups, and those groups would take certain sections of road where you could actually look and walk the area, and they would do their own systematic search of that area. Different groups were dropped off at different parts of the road, and everybody more or less started close to about the same time and walking downhill once they
want to
completed.
refer your attention back to Exhibit 501. This was the search you had conducted in Middle Mountain. Is this roughly the area of Middle Mountain that you were searching with this larger group in June?
Yes,
And how did it differ from your search that you conducted in May, on May 22nd of that year?
well, the number of people involved.
And did you, when you did this search in May, were you mainly on the roadway itself?
I was on the roadway, and I would also 100 yards either side of the roadway or 50 yards, depends on the terrain. Some places there wasn't really anywhere to go, depending on how steep it was, or for instance, the waterfall, you'd have to go down in there, but basically staying in the roadway and as far as someone could toss something.
And then, when you went back with this larger scale search, was it the intention to spread out off the roadway a little farther?
Yes, considerably farther, as far as they could. They would string people on the line and they would search wherever they could walk, pretty much.
You say string people on the line. What does that mean?
Well, they would line people up side by side, straight out from the road, and walk downhill and kind of fan the whole area, and more eyes and further out, and a lot more ground can be covered that way, and a lot more people might be able to find something. So that's the intent, and the people in charge of those particular searches may have did grid searches or circular searches, or any number of patterns to search, just depending on the terrain and how they could do it.
And did this search produce evidence related to the disappearance of Dylan Redwine?
That search did.
What was the first item that you recall being recovered?
Received a radio transmission that someone found a shoe, and they weren't sure if it had anything to do with the case. So I went to go look at it, and
did you photograph it?
I did.
If I showed you those photographs, would you recognize them?
Yes.
I'd like to approach with peoples 306, 307, 308, 309, and 310.
You may.
Take a moment to look these over and let me know when you're finished.
Yeah.
Do you recognize these exhibits?
Yes.
Are they fair and accurate representations of the shoe that was found on Middle Mountain?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
They're admitted.
When you took these photographs of the shoe, what did you do with those photographs?
I entered them into evidence and did the same thing with the shoe.
And if I showed you the shoe itself, would you recognize it?
Yes.
I'm approaching with what's previously been admitted as 311, I believe. Yes.
Okay.
And what is that, sir?
That's the shoe.
What did you do with the shoe?
I photographed it, bagged it, and later it was logged into evidence.
Were either of these items used or presented to Dylan Redwine's family?
Could you repeat that?
Was this item presented for identification to Dylan Redwine's family?
Yes.
And how did that occur?
It was, well, she was with a team, I believe, at the gravel pit, and radio communication with her that we had a shoe that we wanted her to look at because it might be his, and it was taken to wherever she was at. And then I received transmission later that she identified it as his shoe.
Thank you. If I may approach you. Yes. I want to go back to the photographs for a second, if I may publish, starting with 306. Is this what the shoe looked like when it was first found?
Yes.
And let's move down the line and then to 307, 308. At this point, had you moved the shoe to better photograph it?
Yes.
And was this, let's go back to 306, please. How would you describe the terrain where the shoe was found?
Well, you could see some of it, but it was fairly steep and rugged, a lot of slash, and in fact, it's steeper than that picture even indicates.
Okay. And if we could just kind of walk through the pictures, 309, I think, is where we were at next. Another photograph of the shoe out there in the field where it was found.
Yes.
And then 310. And this is a picture of a shoe, obviously, in a different location, correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Nearby to the shoe, was there any other items of evidence found that day?
Yes.
Do you recall what that was?
There was, I believe that day, some of us, like a shred of underwear and earbuds and scraps of clothes were found at the site that looked like it was a dump site for the body.
Okay, and we're going to visit those in just a second. I'll be more direct. Do you recall a sock being found near to the shoe?
Yes, it wasn't far away.
And if I showed you photographs of that, would you recognize them?
Yes.
312 and 313. If I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
I'm showing you what's been marked as exhibits 312 and 313. Can you tell me if you recognize them?
Yes.
Are they fair and accurate representations of the sock?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Any objection?
Not on that record.
312 and 313 are admitted.
All right, let's start with exhibit number 312. What do we see here, sir?
That's the sock?
Is this the picture of where it was actually found?
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, had it been moved or shifted before this photograph was taken?
It hadn't been moved at that time.
Had not, is that what you said?
Yes, it was. That's the first photograph, I believe.
Okay, and then the next picture, 313? Another photograph, obviously it's been moved to a new location.
Yes.
If I showed you the sock itself, would you recognize it?
Yes.
I'm approaching with what I believe has already been admitted as 314.
Go ahead.
Is that the same sock that was found in the field that day?
Yes.
How did the discovery of Dylan's shoe and sock impact the rest of the search going forward?
Once Elaine Redwine identified it as his, everyone concentrated on that and around where that was found. We did a more extensive search, crisscross pattern, trying to find anything that might be of help. So lots of searchers, arm's length away, and we covered and recovered that whole area.
Do you recall finding a bone in that same general region?
Yes, there was, they enlisted the help of a dog team, cadaver dog. And, the handler of the dog noticed that he alerted on one of the bones. There was a lot of bones, even of animals everywhere. But, the dog alerted on this particular bone, and, that's what that dog does. So I went down there and photographed it and collected it and entered it for testing, and it went into evidence. Also, sent photos to a archaeologist, and she's a professor at the college, to see if it looked like it might be a human bone, and she thought that...
Objection, this is hearsay. He's about to say what the doctor said.
Mr. Champagne?
That's fine, I'll stop you there. If I showed you photographs of that bone, would you recognize them?
Yes.
Right. I've got exhibits 324, 325, and 326, if I may approach.
You may.
You recognize those, sir?
Yes.
And what are they?
These all three are pictures of the same bone that the dog alerted on.
And are they fair and accurate representations of what it looked like that day?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
They're admitted.
Before I publish, I want to ask you, when you collect a bone such as this or other pieces of evidence out there in the field, what kind of precautions were you taking to collect them carefully?
I have latex gloves I'd put on before I moved anything into a bag, so there wouldn't be any contamination, DNA contamination, and we'd seal the bag on the spot. And
When you say seal the bag, what kind of bag are you referring to?
it depends on what the item was. Sometimes in a paper bag, if it was big, we'd use whatever we had. I ran out of paper bags at this point, and I was moved on to some larger trash bags, black plastic.
And why did you put it into a bag?
Prevent any contamination. We don't want anything touching it.
And let's go ahead and publish exhibit number 324 for the jury. Can you describe what we're seeing here, sir?
That's the bag I put the bone in.
So for this particular bone, you had actually moved it prior to this photograph being taken.
Yes.
And 325? What do we see here?
That's another photo of it.
That's the same bone, though.
Yes.
And 326, please. Same bone.
Yes.
Okay. And that's scale for measurement.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Was there another bone found in that general area as well?
Yes, just downhill from that one is a bigger bone, probably a tibia, and it was also photographed and bagged.
And if I showed you photographs of that bone, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Exhibits 302, 303, and 304, please, if I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
Start that sequence again.
Sure. Exhibits 302, 303, and 304. You recognize those, sir?
Yes.
And what are they?
That's the bone that we found directly below, not far from the other bone. It was downhill.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate representations of the bone as you saw it that day?
Yes.
Move to admit.
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
302, 303, and 304 are omitted.
Thank you. Move to publish, please.
Yes.
Let's start with 302. What do we see here, sir?
That's the second bone we found.
Okay. Does this represent the condition you found it in when it was first discovered?
Yes.
And so this one looks like it was at least partially sort of hidden beneath the leaves and other things out there. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. 303. Is this another picture of that same bone?
Yes.
And 304. A third picture of that same bone?
Yes.
You described, thank you, these bones, and without getting into what anybody else said, these bones, photographs of these bones were presented to a local professor at the college, you said?
Yes.
And were these bones later sent off for testing for DNA?
Yes.
Now, there were other items that were found in that same general area that were not bones. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you described some of those things earlier, like a T-shirt, scraps, and earbuds. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us about how that came to pass.
It was a search that I was leading with, I don't remember how many volunteers, at least maybe a dozen or more. We were just going to start at a grid search, not far from each other, and go one direction, then go the other direction. And during that search, someone at the upper end of the line radioed that they found what looked like pieces of clothing. And so I went up there to take a look.
And do you recall what was found?
There were some black earbuds. Looked like they were, I don't know if they were chewed off at one end, or if it was cut, can't tell. And there was a piece of underwear and pieces of shirt, and ultimately there was a piece of a bone that was identified as a clavicle bone in that same spot.
And there are other witnesses that are going to discuss those items you've just described, but I want to focus in on the clavicle itself.
Okay.
If I showed you photographs of that clavicle, would you recognize it?
Yes.
298, 299. And
I'm not going to object to the exhibits. I am going to object to the identification of these remains as specific bones unless the proper foundation has been laid. I think it's a medical opinion.
that's fine, Judge.
All right.
These bones in pictures 298 and 299, would you recognize them if I showed them to you?
Yes.
298, 299 are omitted.
And that was the bone that was discovered at that dump site.
Okay. And I think I misspoke. I said bones. Those are two photographs, but it's the same bone. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is that a fair and accurate representation of the bone you found that day?
Yes.
Move to admit 298 and 299.
They're already in.
Oh, thank you, Judge. Move to publish.
Yes.
This one's a little harder to see. Can you come down from the podium and point out to the jurors where the bone is in that picture?
Yes.
Thank you. You can have a seat again. And 299, please. Is this more of a close-up on that same bone?
Yes.
Was that bone collected in a similar fashion to the other ones you've described?
Yes.
Placed into evidence?
Yes.
You did describe, and I do want to touch base about the earbuds. You said that there were some earbuds found as well?
Yes.
Okay. And if I showed you photographs of that, would you recognize it?
Yes.
I'd like to approach with People's Exhibits 317, 318, and 319, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. Please take a look at those and tell me if you recognize them.
Yes, those look like the photos I took of the earbuds.
Okay. Are they fair and accurate descriptions of the item as you saw it that day?
Yes.
Move to admit?
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
317, 18, and 19 are admitted.
Okay, let's go to publish Exhibit 317, please. So, Mr. Patterson, this may be a challenge, I imagine it is for anybody looking at this photograph. Can you please point out where the earbuds are in that photograph with the pointer?
Yes.
And you're moving the pointer, does that represent the wires of the earbud, is that correct?
Wires run along here.
Is this how it appeared on the day that those earbuds were found? Let's go to 318, please. And Mr. Patterson, there's actually a microphone right there. If you could use that microphone to your right of the television. Again, point out the earbuds for us and describe it. That's great. And let's go to 319, please. This is more of a close-up photograph? Okay, thanks. You can have a seat again.
We'll leave it on.
If I showed you the actual earbuds, would you recognize them?
Yes.
I'm approaching with what's been marked as, and previously admitted as Exhibit 321. Do you recognize those, sir?
Yes.
Are they the earbuds that you found in the field that day?
Yes.
And finally, the underwear band. If I showed you a photograph of that, would you recognize it?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
This is exhibit number 315. Do you recognize that item, sir?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's the elastic part of some underwear.
Is that what you found in the field that day?
Yes.
Is it in a different location?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of what it looked like?
Yes.
Move to admit?
Mr. Bogan?
No objection.
It's admitted.
Thank you, sir. And move to publish number 315. Is this the underwear band that you found in the field that day?
Yes.
And we see some organic material attached to it. What is that?
Those are elastic strands from that underwear band that entwined in the forest duff.
Okay. And if I showed you the actual item, would you recognize it?
Yes.
like to approach with what's been previously admitted as 316.
Go ahead.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Now, you weren't the person that actually collected many of the items we've just discussed, the earbuds, or found them, I should say. You collected but didn't find them, is that right?
Correct.
And when someone else would find an item that you thought might be of interest, how did it come to be collected?
An investigator would put on his gloves and collect it and bag it, and later it was entered into evidence at the office.
And the person who found it, did they receive any instructions about not touching the item or leaving it where it lay, that kind of thing?
Yes, everybody received instructions on the search team that if an item was found, there to leave it. An investigator would come and inspect it and make a determination on whether it should be collected or not.
Okay. The general area where these items were found, did you end up drawing a hand-drawn map to describe the locations of the various items?
Yes.
And if I showed you that map, would you recognize it?
Yes.
Exhibit number 330, for the record. I may approach, Your Honor.
Okay.
Do you recognize that, sir?
Yes.
And what is it?
That's a map of the area where we found the remains and the dump site, and did the best I could to show how steep it was, but not much of an artist. That's what I drew.
Okay. You're the author of that map?
Yes.
And is it a fair and accurate description of the locations where those items were found?
Yes.
Move to admit.
No objection.
330 is admitted.
Move to publish.
Yes.
I think if it's okay, I'd like to approach, Your Honor.
Yes, that's fine. Here. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Patterson, I'm pointing here to a large curved section at the top of the map. What does that describe for us?
That's the road that swings around. That's the road that swings around towards the gravel pit.
And we see a secondary road coming off the apex of that first road. What does that describe?
That's a sheep trail road or an UTV road that proceeds down.
And here we see an area where there looks like to be some logs, something to that effect. What is that?
Two fallen trees, two trees that fell and left a kind of a V pattern, but right in between those trees is where the stuff, everything's found.
And you wrote here, body dump site.
That was the assumption at that time, that we were making a body dump site.
You said everything was found there. When you say everything, what do you mean?
I mean the earbuds, the underwear band, the clavicle. That's what I mean by it. It was, in my opinion, the dump site.
And As we describe the other bones, just refer to them as bones, if that's okay. Here we see an item you wrote in there, big rock. Why did you add that in?
It was kind of a marker. It was a fairly large boulder that was in the middle of the area that we were searching. That, and you can see where I marked the shoe and where the sock was found.
And the shoe and the sock are both very close to the big rock, is that correct?
Yes.
And down here, we see some words that are written out. What do those describe?
The tibula is where we found the one bone, and the fibula is where the other bone was found.
How would you describe this entire sort of general area?
It's very steep, wooded, heavy brush or duff, and it's probably a 12–14% grade. So it's very
Objection, foundation, not a topographer. He talks about the percent of the grade.
I think he can make an estimate just, living in this area, that's fine.
Did you have the chance to review a map created by investigator Heidel describing that same area?
Yes.
Was that map fair and accurate to what you recall the locations of those items to be?
Yes.
At any time during this search of this particular area, did you find Dylan Redwine's hat?
I don't recall a hat.
Did you find his backpack?
No.
Did you find his wallet?
No.
Did you find his iPod?
No.
Did you find his iPhone?
No.
I don't have any further questions for this witness.
All right, this is probably a good place to take our lunch break. We'll start up again at 1:15. Everybody, remember that you're not allowed to talk about the case with each other. Don't talk about it with anybody else. Don't do any research or read about the case. So everybody rise to the group, please.